Turkey's Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu has resigned. It follows a power struggle between him and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. But why is the Prime Minister stepping down now? And what does it mean for the state of democracy in Turkey? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. There's long been speculation in Turkey about a rift between President Erdogan and the man he handpicked as Prime Minister, Ahmet Davutoglu. The two men once represented the country's strongest political partnership, but it is a relationship that's looked increasingly strained in recent days, and on Thursday, Davutoglu perhaps felt it was time for him to go. He announced he would step down as AK Party leader at an extraordinary Congress in a few weeks. And that's an unprecedented move in more than half a century of parliamentary democracy in Turkey. It also paves the way for President Erdogan to choose a new ally to serve as prime minister. Well, Davutoglu defended his record in office and downplayed reports of a split in the party.
This era was the era of a strong president and a strong prime minister. As our president said in his speech in the emergency convention, I tried to put this principle stressed by our president that day into practice. That day, our president had said, "I don't want a caretaker prime minister." That was the right approach. That was the correct advice. I took over as a prime minister and worked day and night to be true to the position. Our nation is the witness.
Ahmet Davutoglu began his political career under Erdogan's guidance. He was a policy advisor and then foreign minister to Erdogan back when he was prime minister. And in 2014, as we mentioned, President Erdogan handpicked Davutoglu to become the AK Party chief and prime minister. But over the past year, there have been signs of a growing rift between the two leaders. Erdogan's supporters say Davutoglu has been lukewarm about Erdogan's plan to expand presidential power. The two leaders also disagree on whether to engage in peace talks with Kurdish rebels and have given opposing statements to the public about detaining government critics. Well, time now to get the thoughts of our guests. Joining us in Ankara is Ozgur Ozdamar. He is a professor of international relations at Bilkent University. In London, we have Wolfango Piccoli, managing director at Teneo Intelligence. And in Istanbul, joining us via Skype is Sinan Ulgen, visiting scholar at Carnegie Europe. Welcome, all of you. Ozgur Ozdamar, what do you make then of this development and of Mr. Davutoglu's speech in announcing that he would step down?
Yes, this is something we expected for a while, although no one could exactly predict how and when would this happen. But we heard about all these rumors that actually more than a year ago this started, that there was a rift between the two top administrators in the country. But to be honest, at this time, exactly this way, nobody could have predicted this 2 weeks ago, although we read some rumors, but those rumors have always been around. But at the end of the day, he didn't actually resign, but he was forced out of his position. He said that Mr. Davutoglu said that he will continue to be prime minister until the extraordinary Congress in May 22nd. But pretty much we can consider him as a retired politician unless there's a big unexpected change.
Sinan Ulgen, what does this mean for Turkish politics, and the fact as well that in his speech he seemed to very keen to show a sense of unity, and that there was no disagreement between himself and Mr. Erdogan. What did you make of that?
On the surface, no, but obviously there were a number of areas where the two leaders have disagreed, which is why we have seen this development in Turkish politics. But going forward, there will certainly be a short-term period of uncertainty, with now speculation about who is going to be the replacement of Davutoglu. There are a number of lead contenders for that position. But in any case, this uncertainty will, for all practical purposes, be eliminated on the 22nd of May, when the ruling party will hold its extraordinary convention. After that, the question will become the structure of the new cabinet. Because this is going to be important to determine both Turkey's short-term political but also economic performance. We know that there are a number of competing viewpoints about how the economy must be run. People that are closely associated with the presidency have been quite adamant that Turkey should follow a different policy course, especially with regard to monetary policy, trying to cut down the interest rate. Whereas people who are associated with the still current Prime Minister Erdogan, in particular the former economics boss Ali Babacan, but also the current Deputy Prime Minister Mehmet Şimşek, have adopted a more pro-reform agenda, or have been trying to at least. So we shall see as well the outcome of this in the formation of the new cabinet. And finally, the new cabinet will also give us a sense of where Turkey will be heading in terms of its foreign relations, and particularly relations with Europe, at a time where there is a crucial deal in the making for managing the refugee crisis.
Wolfango, Piccolo, should we take the message from this as Erdogan is very much the man in charge in Turkey? It begins and ends with him, and anyone who wants to be prime minister needs to understand that.
Absolutely. That was the case. It is the case, and it will remain the case for the foreseeable future. That is why I think that who becomes the next prime minister is not particularly relevant. We know who's going to be select the person, and we know that this person will be an Erdogan loyalist, and whose job will be mainly to implement decisions taken at the presidential palace, and to implement Erdogan's personal agenda, specifically with reference to the potential amendment to the constitution. I think what is much more interesting, and Sinan alluded to that, is, especially from an investor's point of view, is who takes over the economic portfolios. Are we going to see continuity there, therefore with Deputy Prime Minister Şimşek keeping a control on the economy, or are we going to have another surprise? If we have a surprise, then we might see a very negative reaction from the markets. At this point, the markets are in some sort of wait-and-see position. They don't really care who becomes prime minister, but they care about who is going to remain to control in charge of the Turkish economy.
Ozgur, Ozdamar, is that how you see it? That the main issue here, especially for not just for people in Turkey, but for people outside of Turkey who do business with the country, is they're concerned about how the economy is going to be run?
It is one of the concerns, of course, especially for the people who are outside of the country. But you can be sure that it is also a concern for all of us who are living here. In the past, President Erdogan, while he was prime minister or when he's president, he did not take huge steps that would hurt the economy. So I don't expect a huge change or an abrupt move that would actually cause a crisis or anything like that. Probably, most probably, the cabinet will be pretty much the same. Only the prime minister will change. Maybe there will be some more, but there will not be a huge change in the cabinet. And the only thing that is expected from this prime minister is full commitment to the constitutional change towards the presidential system. I think at the heart of all this rift, at the heart of all this political crisis that we are seeing right now was Mr. Davutoglu's lack of full commitment to Mr. Erdogan's plan to change the Turkish system into a presidential system. I think once President Erdogan finds a more loyal prime minister who would actually show full commitment towards this aim, then I think the rest will not change that much. But that's only for the cabinet because you asked it. But except for that, there will be a lot of changes in the year of 2016. Maybe even it will have a spillover effect in 2017, because this was just the first step towards the presidential system. I mean, Mr. Erdogan now got rid of a not so committed prime minister to the presidential system. But in the next step, I think there will be an early election, late summer or early fall. And after that, if Mr. Erdogan is able to keep the two smaller parties out of the parliament, this way he will gain maybe 400 MPs, and this way he can comfortably change the constitution and change the system of Turkey from parliamentary to presidential one. So I think we should expect at least 6 more months, maybe up to 1 year of political and economic uncertainties, because these changes are huge for any country in the world. And for a country like Turkey that has already some structural problems, these are huge changes.
Sure. Let's talk more about those constitutional issues then. Sinan Ulgen, I mean, how important is it that there be another election so that Erdogan can secure? I mean, if he gets the margin of victory that he wants, would that give him then a mandate to go ahead and change the constitution?
Well, absolutely. The Turkish constitution allows 2 options for changing the constitution. The first option is if the constitutional bill gets a backing by 3/5 of parliament, then the bill can be put to a referendum. There's a higher threshold, which is 2/3 of parliament, and if the bill gets support from more than 2/3 of parliament, then it can be directly adopted in parliament without a need for a referendum. Today, the ruling party has not enough support for either of those thresholds. So there has been discussion of at least trying to get the backing of some of the opposition members in parliament, especially from the nationalist MHP party. But so far, the public opinion also has not been convinced about the benefits of adopting a presidential system. So there is a substantial risk of going to a referendum under current circumstances for the presidential system itself. That is the reason why, especially with this latest change in Ankara in the power constellation, there has been a renewed prospect for an early election that could provide the new parliamentary topography configuration, which would allow President Erdogan to get a direct parliamentary approval for the constitution. Today, looking at the polls, that is essentially a consequence of the ineffectiveness and frailty of the political opposition in parliament, with the pro-Kurdish HDP party polling below the threshold and the nationalist MHP polling just around the threshold, which essentially means that if we go to early elections as things stand, AKP, the ruling AK party, could have a prospect of getting the majority that they need in parliament to directly change the constitution. There are at present 2 obstacles to that. One is the challenge to the presidency of the Nationalist Party, MHP. If there's a change in their leadership, that might revitalize the party, and it would then start to cannibalize the votes from the AK party. That's one. And the second one is really about the economy. The economy should continue to do well, even under these rather difficult circumstances.
If I could just jump in there for a second, Sinan, I want to ask you, what are ordinary Turks making of all of this then? Obviously, the AK party supporters would support this move if they're in line with Erdogan. But what about others? What about people in the opposition, for example, and ordinary Turks?
Well, in terms of the opposition, the way that they have perceived the events of yesterday is an indication that Erdogan has gone beyond his constitutional powers and is operating as a de facto executive president, trying to influence and succeeding to influence the political party, AK party, which is the ruling party. That's the interpretation among the opposition. Among normal Turks, I think there is still a lack of understanding why this happened, given that Davutoglu himself was a handpicked candidate by Erdogan.
Wolfango, Piccoli, if we look at some of the areas in which the president and prime minister disagreed, one of them we mentioned was the EU deal. Davutoglu championed this deal with the EU to stem the flow of refugees across the Aegean Sea, an issue which the president had shown very little interest. What does this mean then for that deal now that Davutoglu is out of the picture?
First of all, I would somewhat kind of review a bit what you just described. I think the deal is equally important, but it was equally important for Davutoglu and Erdogan. The question here is who gets the ownership of the deal, specifically if the deal delivers what the Turks want, visa-free travel to Europe. So I think from Erdogan perspective, there was a sense that Davutoglu was trying to claim it that this as his own victory. So it was a bit of a tension there. And certainly Erdogan also was not particularly pleased about the fact that it seemed that Davutoglu had easier access to European leaders, Western leaders actually, including the United States, than Erdogan himself. Now, what does it mean for the deal? There will be more reservation in Europe about this deal. There will be more concern about the trajectory of Turkey as a country that is still trying to become a member of the European Union. But on the other way around, from the European perspective, there is no alternative to Turkey, meaning that in Europe, nobody, and certainly not Chancellor Merkel, wants to see the flow of refugees going up again. So they might not like what they've seen happen in Ankara over the last 48, 72 hours. They might have reservation, but they're going to keep the deal on the table, and they will hope that Erdogan will stick to what has been agreed so far, and the refugee flow will basically remain kind of somewhat constrained. There is simply no plan B from the European side on how to deal with the refugee crisis. Turkey, as of now, is the only option.
Ozgur, Ozdamar, what do you think this means for the European Union and their dealings with Turkey now? Because while many of them were kind of uneasy about what Erdogan was doing and the direction that he was taking the country, Davutoglu always seemed like the face of Turkey that they could deal with. What does this mean now that he's gone?
I don't think there will be a big change about the relationship between the EU and Turkey. Because, like Mr. Piccoli has said, the EU has no plan B, and they need Turkish cooperation in the refugee crisis, that's for sure. And also, any new Turkish government will not be the one who wants to break this deal, because this deal with the European Union has some domestic consequences, one of them being the visa-free travel for Turkish citizens to Europe. I mean, no next prime minister will want to look like they deprive Turkish people from visa-free travel to Europe. So there's also the financial deal that Turkey needs to look after the refugees. I think there is enough interests at stake for both sides to maintain that deal. And I don't believe that President Erdogan was against this deal. I think there were some disagreements about how to do this deal and whether the president was informed properly about this deal or not. That's why I don't think President Erdogan or the next prime minister that he will pick will go against the deal with the European Union. It will go on as planned.
Sinan Ulgen, what does this mean as well then for Turkish institutions? Because for those who have been critical of Erdogan, they say that that he basically has control of the military, of the parliament, and the prime minister's position was the kind of one area where there was some sort of independence. Are we seeing a kind of gradual hollowing out of Turkish institutions?
Yes, indeed. That can be certainly one of the outcomes of this latest change. But I also want to slightly go back and having listened to both Wolfgang and Ozgur, I have a bit less optimistic outlook on how this will impact the refugee deal and the Turkey-EU relationship. Because yesterday was a critical day, not only in terms of what we saw in Ankara, but also Brussels, the European Commission came out with its report essentially recommending visa freedom, but that was a conditional recommendation. And the Commission was quite clear, and the Commission's position was seconded by the European Parliament later on last evening, that Turkey still needed to fulfill a number of difficult conditions before it can be granted visa freedom. And those conditions, one of them is the change in Turkey's legislation concerning terrorism. The EU wants that legislation to be brought closer to the norms in Europe, and also the enforcement of that legislation to be much more in line with European practices. That particular requirement has been extremely difficult for Turkey to adopt at a time when the country feels under acute threat from terrorism. All the more so since there's also been a difference of opinion between the presidency and the prime minister on this, where Erdogan adopted a much more categoric and hawkish tone on this specific issue compared to the prime minister. So going forward, at least to me, it is unclear whether Turkey would be willing and able to deliver on this criteria. And therefore, the question will be whether Europe will be able to demonstrate a degree of flexibility over this or not. Because if it doesn't, and if it does not provide the visa freedom to Turkey, then the whole deal will be under jeopardy, as Turkey already stated that it would suspend the implementation of the readmission agreement.
Wolfango.
So I think there we're actually heading towards at least a mini crisis as concerns the future of the deal.
Wolfango, Piccoli, what do you think this means for Turkey's institutions?
Well, we have seen the weakening of the independence of the institution for some time. I don't think it's just Erdogan to be blamed. Let's be very clear. When Gül was president, he didn't try very hard to stop this weakening of institution by Erdogan. The same Davutoglu, as a prime minister, he might have different kind of views, but he didn't try very hard to stop it either. So this trend has been there for some time. Is likely to continue for the foreseeable future. And it's not just the weakening of the institution, it's also the quality of the individuals that is basically appointed at the top of this institution, which I think it should be scrutinized very closely. And certainly what we have seen is a concentration of power increasingly in the hands of one specific individual. Power over the ruling party, the most popular party in Turkey for the last 12 years or so, and also power over all the key executive bodies in the country. Generally, when we have this concentration of power in the hands of the individuals, it doesn't end up well, but certainly this is not likely to be a risk in the short term.
I just want to pick up on one thing, Wolfango, Piccoli. We've talked a lot here about Turkey's, the perception that Turkey is lurching away from democracy and concentration of power. But if the country moves towards a presidential system with the vote of the people, isn't that democratic?
There is nothing wrong with the presidential system. I mean, there is nothing undemocratic with the presidential system. But there are lots of question marks about what is the check and balances that you're going to put in place around this presidential system. And what we have seen in Turkey over the last 4 or 5 years is a system of check and balances being increasingly weakened in terms of the media, in terms of academia, in terms of the judiciary itself. So shifting to presidential system, there is nothing wrong about that, as long as it's done according to the book. But it's much more in which kind of context we're going to place a presidential system, especially when you have such a strong leader like Mr. Tayyip Erdogan.
On that, we are going to have to leave it. Thank you, all three of you, Ozgur, Ozdamar in Ankara, Wolfango, Piccoli in London, and Sinan Ulgen in Istanbul. Thanks for being on Inside Story, and thank you for watching. As always, you can see this program again anytime by visiting our website aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.